and welcome to another episode of Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and today on the season 2 finale of Frame and Reference, we've got Erik Messerschmidt, the DP of Devotion. You also know Erik from shooting Mank and Mindhunter and his long career as a gaffer, and we talk about all of that. Erik is very generous with his knowledge and his time and his perspective, and I certainly learned a lot, and it gave me kind of a weird sense of comfort. I can't really explain it, but it made me happy to be a DP and keep working. But not a lot of technical talk in this one. This is a lot more theory and stuff, so if you're into that sort of thing, you're going to love this. And like I said, this is the final episode of Season 2, wrapping up the year. I'm going to take a break until probably February. Mid-February is when we'll start getting more episodes of Frame and Reference, because I'm not going to be around. I'm going to be working. So look forward to that. Be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening to this. If you haven't, if you just found this episode, and if you did just find this episode, go ahead and listen to the back catalog because it's all great. I have yet to have a dud of an interview. And if you are a listener of this, I'll just say this because it's it's holidays and stuff, and I'm feeling the holiday feelings. But if you do listen to this, drop me an email, shoot me a DM or something, because I don't get a lot of feedback. I don't know. Leave a review, I'll read those. But let me know what you like. Let me know what you don't like, because going into season 3, I'm going to change some things up, and not a lot. It'll basically be the same podcast, but just thinking about those things. So. That's it for me. I always like to keep these intros brief. That'll be something that changes in season 3. Much briefer intros, less vamping. So anyway, I'll let you get to it. Please enjoy my conversation with Erik Messerschmidt, ASC. Actually, speaking about things that you people probably ask you all the time, going back to your gaffing years, what was it like working on Bad Grandpa?
I did like 3 days. There were 3 days of that movie where they actually lit stuff.
Yeah, I bet.
And I guess, I only did 3 days on it, and because it was apparently the only 3 days where they needed to do any lighting. And my friend Jason McCormick was shooting it, and he called me up and he said, "Hey man, you want to do this thing?" I said, "Bad what?" He said, "Yeah, it's Johnny Knoxville. It's going to dress up as Grandpa." And I was like, "Oh, okay, sure. I'm not doing anything. I'm available." So it was 3 days. And then I got the screen credit as if I had done the entire movie. Knowing Johnny Knoxville, they probably shot it for like 3 years, But it, we laughed a lot. It was hilarious. But it was, we did I only did 3 days of the movie.
Sure. So I assume there wasn't much interaction with Spike Jonze then.
I don't know that, Spike wasn't there when we shot. I don't think. I've met Spike, but it wasn't, I don't think Spike may have stopped by, but not that I remember. No.
It was, I didn't assume you did, but it's always interesting to meet people who have met people that I were sort of formative to me. And one of those people was Spike, because of, obviously, there was that director's box set with him and Chris Cunningham and Mark Romanek and all that. But with all the music videos, but just it didn't occur to me that you could make Jackass and an Oscar-winning film. I was like, oh, because as a kid, I was more into the goofy shit. And so the idea that oh, wait, you can have fun and be serious. And I was not serious. I was like, I guess I got to start watching whatever, Citizen Kane, I got to start watching all these.
Right.
Were you like that? Did you kind of come to film with a heavy film bias, or did you come into it? Because I heard you talking about you kind of just liked the environment and the working environment more than anything.
Yeah, I loved movies, but I love, I'm an American kid. My mother is European, she's Swedish, and we used to go to Europe all the time. And my parents would expose us my brother and I to European cinema. But, I'm like a kid of the 80s, man. I loved Raiders of the Lost Ark and Close Encounters and, Flight of the Navigator. I came from that generation. And those were the kinds of movies that excited me when I was 12, Yeah. And then as I got and I love the movie. I love the kind of magic of it, I think. And and then when I got older and I sort of started studying film, then I got a sense for what capital C cinema was,
Right.
And then I had a better appreciation for it. And so I was sort of already in cinema at that point. I was kind of like, it was already something I wanted to do.
Right.
I think. Yeah. I didn't get into movies because I loved movies. I got into movies because I loved making movies, I think. Yeah.
I feel kind of the same way. I recently started to, like, especially over the pandemic, went on like a Criterion purchasing spree and stuff, like, just because I was like, man, if I want to, this is better as a question. Do you feel like, obviously knowing the great films of the past will inform you and make you a better filmmaker, but have you maybe met anybody, or did you notice any of this where some people are kind of ignorant of the history of film and still succeeded?
Totally. Of course. Yeah. I think success, people on the outside love to decide what success is. And it's like, if you're an artist or creative person, I think it's, you have an entirely different perspective on what it means, to succeed, I think, and, to me, to a large degree, success is just that people continue to allow you to do this. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like that you don't get thrown in movie jail and someone calls you again and you get to go back you get to go back into the playground and work more, I think that is like, at least career success. I think, if you're going to have could definitely have a philosophical conversation that it's far more than just being able to continue to work. And, it's like having family and meaning and friends and all, the kind of big life stuff, obviously. But yeah, I think what cinema literacy does for you is it gives you a language to work in a nuanced way, but that's only really appreciated by a very few number of people, and, it's most people I know that are working at a really high level, in terms of their ability to use cinematic grammar, kind of like in the same way that, the great writers of history worked, they weren't really appreciated by the masses, Right. And so it takes great filmmakers and great writers sometimes, I think, to recognize great filmmakers and great writers, because they're working in such a nuanced way that the layman just doesn't quite, they can't conceptualize what it is you're doing. And sometimes it's not that interesting, sometimes it's like the technique to us is more interesting than the process, or, than the product ultimately. You sort of done the storytelling thing before. So it's like, well, let me try this in an interesting way. And maybe you don't succeed, but your technique was interesting, and that's what makes it interesting to you, and I think as an artist, creative person, it's like, sometimes it's just the act of doing, it's like you make the movie yourself sometimes, I think, I see filmmakers do that all the time.
Yeah. It's like, everyone can enjoy a film, but I definitely have caught myself, seeing a film with whoever, and I see something I'm like, that looks, just absolutely flies over the average person's head. I'm like, oh my God, that was so difficult. Or like, especially in, if I'll show people like snowboarding clips and I'm like, look at this. And they're like, yeah, it's a backflip. I'm like, no. Like, it was way harder.
Yeah.
I guess that is kind of the difficult thing, is like, you want to be, me and I'll name drop Kenna on the podcast. Me and Kenna were just talking about there's infinite, beginners, but only so many experts, and it must be difficult to try to, maybe not for you, but especially like on the indie level, to make something that is both going to catch the eye of your peers or people you look up to, but also appease the masses, as it were.
Yeah, it's like, I think it's a lot like music, it's a lot like rock and roll, it's like there are some metal guitarists that are probably far superior to any of your run-of-the-mill pop rock musicians, but they just don't get noticed because they're working in this genre that sort of it only appeals to a very select few group of people. But in terms of their ability to play the instrument, they exceed at this incredible level, or jazz drummers, or horn players in the orchestra, or could easily go and play in big rock orchestral bands or whatever, but they choose to work in this niche. And I think that's kind of a bit what you're talking about, I guess, to some degree. I don't know. I mean, I think for me, a lot of it is like, how do you keep the job interesting for yourself to, where you're pushing yourself to do something, so you're not just kind of taking the easy way out. It's like, I think people, and I also think that when I look at the filmmakers that I really admire, they're kind of the ones that don't give a shit at all if people like their movies,
Sure. Yeah.
And especially, you're in LA and everybody is always sweating whether or not their movie is going to be successful because they need it to be successful to make another movie, and that's,
right.
I mean, I get it. It's a business, and of course it makes sense, but in a way, I think has an enormous reason why European cinema tends to be so much more interesting, because they don't have the same economic pressures that American filmmakers have, for the movies to be commercially viable and all that stuff. And, so you have filmmakers like Lars von Trier out there that are just trying stuff, and they're able to take risks that are sometimes really interesting, and you don't, you talk to those people, directors like that, and they're like, yeah, I don't know, I made this for myself and I hope people enjoy it, I guess. But, if they don't like it, whatever, that's like such a luxury. Not very few of us could have, can afford.
Yeah. It's, do you think that's changed at all? The sort of, cause I would say that the scuttlebutt on the internet is always that, like, oh, there's a certain type of film that just feels like it's been churned out, and there seems to be more of those than ever. From your perspective, was like, because people always mention like the 70s and the 90s being like this great time for film, where like directors were trusted to do whatever they wanted, and now it feels very, clamped down maybe from that. From your end, does that check out, or is that freedom still kind of there, even though you just kind of said it's not?
I don't know. No, I think I mean, look, there's so much stuff being made now. I mean, there's way more movies being made. So if you think about, like, in terms of opportunities afforded people, it's like the opportunities are profound. In a way, I kind of think it's too easy. I mean, it's like, you think about, when they made French Connection, it was hard to get that movie made, man. Like, they had to really work on it and refine it and talk about what it was, and they had to cast it, and they had to talk, all this stuff had to come together to make that movie, and it's amazing. And they gave them freedom to make the film, but they were prepared, and I think, now, I mean, look, streaming is great. Lots of people are given opportunities to make television shows now. I mean, you look at just the number of television shows that Netflix turns out. But sometimes I watch stuff and I'm like, man, did you guys read the script before you shot it? Like, you know what I mean? Like, this isn't a finished idea.
It does seem like there's a death of pre-production.
Yeah, for sure. And I think part of it is people are so excited to get their stuff done when they're given an opportunity. They say they're ready when they're not. And in a way, like, when it was harder to get your movie made, you might refine the script for years, I think people are just, they're like, it's like, seems like, oh, really? You'll give me the money? Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm totally ready. I got it. It's like half of it's written, and for some reason studios are like, oh, you have an outline? Yeah, great. Here's the money, and then you see TV shows getting produced where they've got, they have 8 episodes scheduled, but they have 2 episodes written, and the writers are trying to write stuff. And that's been going along for a long time. I mean, when I was working television, I was like, that was kind of a systemic problem, I think. But now it's like, man, don't we want to, like, have an idea, and I wish there was, honestly, like, my colleagues are going to kill me for saying this, but I wish there was more oversight sometimes. I mean, I wish there was like, no, guys, like, let's make sure that this is solid. But also, you look at movies of the 70s and also movies of the 90s, the studio executives at that time were filmmakers.
Right.
And they weren't MBAs. So it makes sense, why stuff gets greenlit and why certain things get decided and why there's a content war and all that stuff. Yeah, man. I mean, exactly. Sure. Whatever. I mean, I get it. But I think, I think a lot of the reason, in particular the 70s, those movies were made. I mean, Clute, I don't think you make Clute these days.
Sure.
I don't think you make Close Encounters these days. I mean, if you went to the Close Encounters pitch meeting and you said, yeah, and at the end, Richard Dreyfuss gets on the ship and he leaves his family behind, no one would greenlight that movie. I mean? Like, come on, and, all of us, including the studio executives, are like, this is one of the best movies ever made. And you're like, yeah, in which movie now does the lead character get and abandon his family, get on the spaceship and abandon his family? It would never happen, the Guardians of the Galaxy doesn't end with him getting on the ship and leaving everyone he cares about,
Thanks for the help. I'm out. Found my mom. Well, I guess if you found his mom, it'd be different. But, well, it does. I had heard you say once or twice that, like, that a sort of egalitarian dictatorship is the correct move for a film set. And it's kind of, I don't know if I'm fully misquoting you there, but like, it does seem, I've noticed whenever I've run projects, I'm thinking like the ski club that I ran in college, or like this comedy show that I produce, stand-up comedy show that I produce weekly. It's like, especially the comedy show is like the whole past year we were doing everyone was just filling in where they needed to. And the show's great. We get the best comics in the world, but it just feels like there's no one steering it. Like we don't have an accountant. Like money just stays in a little bin and gets put under the beer, and then you come back and it's suddenly I'm kind of realizing that same thing where it's like, okay, we don't have to be assholes, but there should just be kind of a, like, here's the vision, let's go from there, and like make sure everyone knows exactly what they're supposed to do and kind of have a little bit of oversight, like you're saying.
Yeah, I think probably what you heard me say was benevolent dictatorship, not egalitarian.
But I guess, that's me trying to use two big words there.
It's okay. Look, it would be great if it's egalitarian, but I don't think a film set can function that way, quite frankly. Right. I just, I think government should, but I don't think that film sets can. I mean, it's a little bit like being on a boat, you kind of need a skipper. The skipper's got to have the final word, and I think vision is misused in a way, because it implies that the director is the soothsayer, that they're the oracle. And that's sometimes the case, but I don't think it's always the case. And in a way, it's like sometimes the most important thing for the director to be is just decisive, And so if you surround yourself with creative people, but you elect one person, and in this, I mean, elect not in the democratic way, but in the, you're taking a job and that this is the director and they're the decider. And so, all day, the costume designer walks up and they've got two dresses and they're like, this one or this one. And the director, the worst thing is when the director's like, I don't know, what do you think? The designer has already filtered this into a thing. These are my ideas. Now you pick one, That's, to me, like, that's directing. It's like, oh, clearly that one. Okay, cool. The problem arises when the designer or the DP or the production designer or the, whatever, are like, they bring in two and they're like, but I really want this one.
Right.
You know what I mean? Or they bring one. And then the director's like, that's not what I want. And then they're all hurt. And they're like, well, but I had my idea. It's like, I don't think that's the job at all. I mean, I think the job is like, okay, cool. I think there's like 4 places we can put the camera. I think it should be here. And the director's like, no, man, we need to get this in the frame. And then I'm going to cut to that. I'm going to cut to that. And then I don't know what we're going to do next. And they're like, oh, well, maybe we could do a POV. Oh, yeah, we'll do the POV. That's the conversation that should happen. This
you go
thing
80
of like,
so they can go 20.
Yeah, or whatever, or you go 20 because they've given you 80.
Sure.
that's also okay, you know. Um, and because that last 20% may be the most important part, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like that's the polish. Uh, or sometimes, there's uh, sometimes you're just lubricating the machinery too,
Yeah.
you know. Um, so I don't think I think it's really, really bad that, my experience anyway on a film set, the bad experiences have all come when the people in positions of power are not decisive
Sure. Oh, I
and they're
mean,
not,
God, that applies to everything, right?
yeah,
Pretty much.
and they're not decisive in a reflexive way. It's like if you understand your film, and that's kind of what I mean about prep and like people setting out to make people the one, like when I go make a movie with David Fincher, he understands the film better than everybody in terms of his point of view.
Right.
So he's able to say, no, no, we're going to do this. I don't know. No, I don't want to do that. I want to do this. Oh yeah, let's do that. Oh good. Yeah, great idea. He's like, it takes milliseconds to make the decisions.
Right.
Um, but it doesn't mean he's making every decision. I mean, it doesn't mean that he's pre-visualized every choice. It just means he's able to, it's a bracket, and he's like, boom, 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 boom,
Yeah.
leading the way.
Well, and it also, obviously, I'm sure you've experienced this, but like having some form of restraint is usually creatively more freeing than having ultimate or infinite options. And like if someone says make me a movie, you're like okay, but if they're like make me a movie that does this looks like this, you're like all right, I can work within those constraints and make something cool. I imagine having a director that's very decisive, as you're saying, like is a form of creative restraint. You're not allowed to just do whatever you want, but you know the assignment, so to speak, and can give those options as you're saying, and maybe it's better, it's easier to work quicker and more efficiently that way.
Yeah, I mean, like every sport is interesting because it has rules.
Yeah.
Like what is it, like golf? You have 14 clubs in the bag. Golf would be a lot easier if you could carry 18 clubs. I used to play golf with this guy who's like 85 years old, and he had like three drive, 35 clubs in his bag, and
Right.
he had six wedges or whatever. But but the restraint of the tools makes the game interesting. It makes it harder, but it also forces you to be decisive about where you're going to hit the ball. And it's the same in filmmaking.
Yeah.
Um, I think, I and people, I think people mischaracterize, or they conflate flexibility with ease of decision making. And
Mm.
in my experience, it's like uh, lots of equipment certainly never makes you faster, and it doesn't give you better ideas. I mean, equipment solves problems, but it's a lot easier if the problems are kind of pre-visualized and predicted, or you have an idea like, okay, I'm going to run into this. I better have that in my bag. And as a cinematographer, oftentimes, you have a lot of stuff around because you can't predict the director, and you don't know what they're going to do. So
Right.
you're like, well, I better have, so a lot of that comes from, or the schedule. It's like, I don't know what time we're going to shoot this. So if we're going to shoot this exterior and the sun might be there, or it might be there, or whatever, it's going to change the tools I have to have around, and that all comes from the director. Honestly, I think, it's like if the director's like, hey, when does this look the best? I think it looks the best at 9 o'clock. Really? Yeah, I think so. Shoot me a picture. Show me. Here it is at 8:30. Here it is at 9:30. Here's at 3 o'clock. Oh fuck, I don't like the way it looks at 3 o'clock. Yeah, great. So don't you think we should do it at 9? Okay, what do we have to do to it at 9? Well, the actors be ready at 7. Everyone has to be there, and then we can only shoot for this period of time. You have to do it at 3 shots or whatever, and then we can go. Okay, great. Well, I love the way that looks. Okay, if you like the way that looks, but we can't shoot it at 3, then I need all this stuff, and it
Right.
still won't look exactly like that. Oh well, I don't want to spend money on that stuff. I want to, those are the kinds of conversations you have in an independent film sometimes. But
You know,
it's harder to have those conversations on a $90 million movie where the actors are driving the schedule or whatever.
you just solved a weird point of it. I was hit with like a wave of relaxation there because I I've picked up a few like bigger gigs that they're still very indie, so have to come up with everything. And I've been stressing about like, oh, fuck, should I buy this? Should I rent this? Should I do? Because exactly what you're saying. Because I don't know. It's very much, hey, show up and then we'll get this sorted.
Yeah.
So I just need, now I'm using you as a sounding board. I just need to hit up the director and be like, all right, let's be way more specific about this.
Yeah. I mean, I think I think directors have to be specific, but it saves them money.
Yeah.
It gets them more stuff. I mean, if you've got so much money to make the movie, it's like, well, if I need X amount of dollars because I don't know where you're going to put the camera, and you need dollars for the costume designer, like maybe we should just be decisive, and then I won't need all this stuff and give more money to the costume designer, you know. I mean, and that's producing, I guess, you know, but some, you know, I think we as cinematographers often get very possessive about tools, and sometimes it's because there just isn't enough. There's enough communication about what it is, and also there's enough understanding about what it is we do on the director's side in terms of how their decision making affects our needs. Mm-hmm. And I think cinematographers need to be more vocal. And, you know, we have historically are sometimes very protective of our craft, and we're like, well, no, I need this stuff. But you know, I think it's like that's like the great thing about digital photography. It's like, look, see how great this looks at 9 a.m. when the sun is over there and all this stuff. Oh yeah, that's killer. Okay, cool. Can we please shoot it at this time of day? You know.
Yeah, I actually did want to talk to you about. I can't imagine you're the only person, but I remember again doing research for Mank, talking about, or you had been talking about how you've pretty much gone, let's say, away from meters and all that altogether, and are pretty much just lighting off a nice HDR monitor. And I was kind of wondering, does that make everyone feel more at ease? Because obviously, any set, there's always someone chimping, you know, looking over your shoulder at the little monitor. By being able to show them, I assume you're building a LUT for whatever ahead of time, just being like, that's what it looks like. Is that better for everyone, or does that kind of make your job harder when now people can see and can make little comments or whatever?
I mean, hopefully you're working with people that are trusting enough and appreciative of what it is you're doing to give you the respect to let you do it. You know, it doesn't mean that you don't or shouldn't get feedback. I mean, I think the problem is when you get feedback from 15 people, you know, it's like, I will take feedback from the director all day long.
Right.
You know, no problem. And it's like, as far as I'm concerned, it's the frame is their property. The movie is theirs. If the movie is great, we all look good. If the movie is bad, it's all on their back.
Right.
So, you know, it's like, if the director doesn't like the way it looks, you can have a conversation about that. You can have a discussion about that. But, you know, I will take that. I will take that seriously every time. Sometimes it's hard, you know, sometimes you're like, no, I don't agree with you. But yeah, but it's a discourse, you know. If you're getting feedback from the craft service guy about how it looks because they're looking over the monitor, then you sort of have to be like, hey man, like you know, with all due respect, this is our space and we're making these decisions, and I happily have a conversation with you over a cup of coffee about what it is we're doing and what you think. I mean, in a way, you know, it's like, I want everybody's opinion, but they just have to be timed properly, you know.
Right.
It's fine. I mean, I don't think I will take the pros of digital photography any day over the cons of film. Yeah. You know, and I mean, I think that it's, for me, the anxiety of dealing with someone who has questions about the choices we're making, is far less than the anxiety of wondering whether or not it's in focus.
Yeah.
You know, and that's by no means like an indictment of film. I mean, I think film is an incredible medium, and it's fun to work in sometimes, and for the right project, you know, but for me personally, it presents anxieties and frustrations that are sometimes not always the best, depending on what project you're on, you know.
Would you say that, because I've had this kind of swirling in my head based on, again, like research of various films that you've worked on, or for instance, Fincher's done, is obviously there's the, you know, production design and costuming and all that, and that's in front of the camera. Do you see the camera or your job as data collection in the moment and then art direction in post primarily these days versus, especially with film, it was all kind of in the negative.
I don't know that it's been in the negative since the digital intermediate has been around.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think Kodak wouldn't want me to make that would want me to make that argument, by the way, because that's a positive argument for film. Is that film captures this enormous dynamic range. So as long as we've had a rank and we've been able to scan film and do a digital intermediate, I think that that's sort of been the case. Mm-hmm. And it's been a long time, I think, since any film has done a real photochemical finish complete. I mean, I don't know if Paul Thomas Anderson is doing photochemical finishes or not. I bet he probably is, but I don't know, like, if Licorice Pizza was a photochemical finish or if it was a DI. But it's I think certainly the alchemy of cinematography in the time of the photochemical process was substantially different than the job now, for sure. Yeah. But I think that, I think the cinematographer's role in the image is somewhat the same. I mean, what you're doing in combination of lighting, filtration, and lens is, still ostensibly the same. We just have more options than we did in 1991. It's the way you treated film stock, whether you were push processing or pull processing or cross processing, or which film stocks you were using and how you were rating it, how you were exposing it. And, that affects saturation and color and all that stuff. It's basically LUTs. Yeah. So I don't think that, the technique is different because the medium is different, but in terms of the choices you're making, they're kind of the same ultimately, but that being said, I don't know. I've said it a lot, but I think that I just don't think the cinematographer is really the person always that should get credit as the author of the visuals of the movie. Right. I mean, it's so hard to say. It's like, oh well, I'm responsible for the image. It's like, well, you photographed it, but you didn't pick the wall color necessarily. And you look at some of these like fantastic images from the history of cinema. It's like that shot from three color, the Red Trilogy of Kieslowski with Juliette Binoche with the bubble. She's blowing the bubble in front of the red wall. I mean, the cinematographer put some front light on it and put the camera there, and they made that choice with Kieslowski, but somebody made the decision to paint that wall red. And to me, it's less interesting about who is responsible and more interesting about the melting pot of ideas that happens on the set between the actors, the director, the script supervisor, the operator, the production designer, the on-set dresser, the prop master, all these people coming together and bringing, this dress or this dress and the decision making. But, there is a huge filtration of making those initial choices, those initial selects. Yeah. And you do that as a DP too, you do it with color and light and all that stuff. But it's not a binary thing.
Sure. I will say, I think I've quoted you saying that on at least 7 podcasts, especially with production designers. Being the exact quote of the DP gets credit for what the production designer did. So I guess it wasn't the exact quote; it was an abstraction of it. But sure. That's been in, whenever you said that first, or whoever said it first, that's been in my head for a while. Where it kind of did make me, as a DP, feel a little more less anxious. I don't have to think of this as like I'm in charge of. I think it is a bit of a self-centered thing. Where like, oh no, if the movie looks bad, it's my fault. It's like, no, it's your responsibility to use the language of lenses and composition, and everyone else pitches in,
Well, I mean, it's also, sometimes you're just there. You're there protecting the director's sandbox half the time too. Yeah. I mean, look, I've worked with directors to pick every lens, and they want to place the camera, that's not always that fun, see, at least for me, because I love the process of camera direction. It's my favorite part, I think. But if you've signed on to make a movie with a director and they want to work that way, I think it's your responsibility to protect that,
Yeah.
and figure out how it is that you can help them in that process, and sometimes it's like, they are very this lens right here, this is the shot. Okay. And then you see them working it out, and you see the shot not working. And if you have an idea about how to improve it, it's like, okay, well, if you recognize the director is struggling with something, then there's a great opportunity to come and say, hey, you want to try this? And depending on your relationship and how open they are, they may say yes or they may say no. But I think it's really unhealthy to say, I'm the DP, and so this is what I have to do.
Right. You want to be more Joe Thornton than Joe Sakic.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Do you watch hockey at all? Is that a reference for nobody?
Yes. I played hockey as a kid.
Okay.
So, yeah.
For people listening, Joe Thornton, all-time assist person, best assister in the world. I'm also from San Jose, so that's very easy.
Go Ducks.
Oh, hell yeah. All right. Dude, it's so easy to get on the train and just go to the Staples Center from my house. But the Amtrak also dumps you off in Anaheim. And every once in a while, I'm like, man, it'd be so easy to just like, especially if the Sharks were in town, just Amtrak down to Anaheim and check those games out. Because my friend used to run the 50-50 raffles. So she'd just give me tickets.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Are you from Anaheim?
No.
Or that's just your team?
No, they're kind of my SoCal team, I guess. I mean, I love the Kings, I guess. I don't know. I used to be a huge hockey fan when I was younger, and I grew up on the East Coast, so it was, it's always the Bruins. But
sure.
But my friends in Boston will probably kill me if they say I'm not a huge Bruins fan anymore. I mean, I don't really follow hockey much anymore. But
yeah, it's actually starting to get interesting. I feel like I don't know. It's a weird thing that I've felt recently, even though the Sharks suck. But hockey overall seems to be hitting this interesting like inflection point where everyone is just way too good. So, your Cale Makars and all that. So it's did growing up doing sports, did you I have this theory that there's obviously two kinds of people, but I feel like there's two kinds of people. There's like athletes and then there's artists, and they end up doing each other's jobs a lot. And so like I think of my friend Chase, who's a fine artist, but he was a professional motocross rider for Red Bull and that's how I met him for many years. And he applies that, I guess, ethos of like waking up every day and training, except in training, in his case, is painting. I mean, he has hundreds of canvases. He's just constantly bombing through and iterating and stuff, which is very much an athletic mindset. Whereas I think most people, when they think of a painter, they think of like, oh, too tired to wake up today, cigarette, coffee, I got to wait for inspiration. Did that athletic streak of you kind of pull over, or do you kind of sit more in that artistic realm? Not to suggest you're depressed or whatever, but
no, it's fine. I'm perpetually depressed about what I'm doing, but I shouldn't say depressed. That's not right. That's the wrong. I know what you mean. But no, I was a terrible athlete, really. I mean, I was a skier. I was a decent skier, and I was a ski racer and stuff. But I was just never coordinated enough. I mean, I was always sort of like a kind of lanky, skinny kid. But I was much more interested in theater and art, photography, and painting, and but a lot of the artistic endeavors, we love, especially cinematographers, I think we love to conflate anyway, painting with filmmaking,
right? Painting
or photography with, they're such solitary activities, and cinematography is not a solitary activity, unless you're shooting wildlife, it's like, if you're making narrative work, television or films, or making TV commercials or whatever, sometimes it's like it's you and 100 people, so it's much more like being on a soccer team, than it is, or a football team maybe, where you're kind of, you're more in a quarterback situation. You sort of motivate people, and you have to execute play, and than it is like the act of painting, And I think when I look at, when I watch football in particular, it's like I see all of this creativity and what's happening, especially from the coach's standpoint, but, from the players, obviously, too, in terms of the execution of these ideas. That's a lot more like filmmaking than painting, I think.
Right.
We talk about painting because it's imagery, and it's 2D imagery ostensibly, and it's, and it's narrative ideas told through told through pictures and all that stuff, but it's like this great combination of literature and photography and teamwork,
It's people getting confused about the end result versus the creation of it. Oh, painting is exactly like photography because they're both pictures.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's, and the thing about filmmaking, I think, or at least the thing about it that interests me is the inception of the idea is just the spark, and then you have to execute.
Right.
And that's not like photography at all, really. Unless you're making a photograph, there's like the difference between making a photograph and taking a photograph.
Right.
If you're Annie Leibovitz and you're setting up a shot, and you're Gregory Crewdson, and you're like setting up a shot,
Dan
and you're art directing the frame. Yeah, exactly. Someone like that, that's different than street photography, obviously. And there's probably more similarities to the act of making a photograph to filmmaking than there is the act of taking a photograph.
Right.
And I think the same thing goes with painting. It's like there's the painters that conceptualize something in their head, and then they paint it. It's entirely different than setting up an easel in front of a lighthouse and painting a lighthouse. And then, they're two very different, distinctly unique methods for the execution of an idea,
Totally.
a visual idea.
I did want to ask, slight pivot, although hockey was a pretty aggressive pivot. Talking about going from like a gaffer to working on Mindhunter, for instance, or Manker, specifically with David Fincher's films. I was wondering if there's anything he does specifically, I suppose on a technical side, although I know that's not horrifically interesting, that helps you guys move efficiently and quickly while still maintaining a very cohesive and beautiful look. Because I've noticed, like, in any behind the scenes photos I've seen, doesn't seem to be a lot of lighting. Like, obviously there is a lot of lighting, but it's like not a lot on the floor. That's just kind of is. And I'm fascinated by that, because I feel like if people knew kind of whatever restraint that is, it might help them in their work.
Well, I think,
or if it even is restraint,
No, it is. Look, it's my opinion, and it's not always a popular one, but it's my opinion that when you're lighting, it's generally a solution to a problem that you presented yourself with. And the more lighting you have to do, and that's a very broad idea, obviously. If you're making Chicago, you have certain aesthetic requirements on it, but I'm talking about the things that exist outside the frame that you're sort of trying to fix, so if you're wrapping key light, or you're bringing in eye light, or you're creating big walls of soft light outside of the camera, outside of the frame. In my practice, it's generally, that's a reaction to a situation I've been put in, or I put myself in, what one of the things that David does and David and I do together is we go to the location or the set and we talk about where we're going to put how the scene is going to get staged. And those conversations sometimes are hours long, and you do that with the actors too. It's like on Mindhunter, the scenes were in many cases like 8 hours long, or 8 pages long, 10 pages long. So the scenes are elaborate and they're complex. So you have screen direction conversations to have. You're talking about, the sequencing and the shot design and the cutting pattern and all that stuff. And those conversations, they lead you to the lighting plan, at least me, And I think where a lot of people run into trouble is they try to make the lighting plan direct the camera. And I see a lot of cinematographers do that. They go to the set and they're like, great, I'm going to put all this light through the windows. And it's like, really? Have you even thought about, have you and the director had a conversation about where you're going to put the camera yet? It used to happen to me a lot when I was a gaffer. I'd like to go do commercials with DPs. And commercial DPs do it a lot because they're like, look at this, and it's like, yeah, but there's like 17 shots on the storyboards and only one of them is here. And like 6 of them are from the windows looking back, Right. And then they spend the entire job trying to get the director to look towards the windows, what David and I do is we look at the set and we talk about where the cameras to go, and not about where the cameras to go in the first setup, but where like all 12 setups are going to be.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, okay, cool. Then if we're going to put the camera in all these places, then I'll put the light there. And then I just need one light. And then for the close up, I'll wrap it in a little bit or whatever. Or he'll go and he said, I know you're going to want to look towards these windows, right? So, well, yeah, I think that'd be good. And he's like, okay, so we can put the table this way or this way. What would you prefer? Well, if we put it this way, I know it'll be side lit for these pieces of coverage, but I need this close up here at this moment. It'll be flat lit. We put it like this, half of it'll be flat lit and the other half will be backlit. But you only cut to the flat lit side once, but I don't want this guy to be silhouette. So I don't want you to have to put a bunch of fill light on his face. That's a conversation that David is having with me because he understands my job. Right. He understands how his choices affect his choices affect the image and how his choices affect the choices I have to make, So we're able to have those conversations really quickly, Yeah. And I think the thing is like, David's blocking supports his aesthetic and makes my job a lot easier because he's playing 3D chess and he's recognizing how his choices are affecting the way the scene's gonna look,
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's also, it's like, I think, the second you light a close up, if you're in a wide shot, you're in a wide master shot or whatever, and then you jump to a close up, you've added a bunch of beauty light to somebody's face.
Right.
So it can be really disruptive in the edit,
Oh, sure.
And,
yeah.
So I think it's like sometimes I do that, there's stuff in Devotion, like we lit Surrender Swan when she turns around, she's playing Elizabeth Taylor, and we did this one close up of her where she turns into the frame, and we lit that shot, but we knew the order of how that was going to cut, so I didn't have to worry about like, oh, we're going to be in a profile and then we're going to cut to this and there's going to be all this light on her face that wasn't in the other shot or whatever. I understood, and JD and I had conversations about what the cutting pattern was going to be so I could make a cheat there. Right. I felt you can't always do that. And with David's movies, the sequencing is often really complex. So it's like you have to be pretty minimal.
Yeah.
Because you're going to put the camera in 30 places in the room, so it's not like you don't have time. You're not going to light it. You're not going to light the set 15 times either. You sort of light it once or twice and that's it.
Yeah. I have 2 side questions and we can talk more about Devotion because I got to see it at the Sony lot. So I got to theoretically, that's the best version of it. But unless it's on IMAX somewhere, but, ostensibly one of your largest bodies of work is on Bones. And, what that was, a while ago, but how has your work changed from doing that to what you've learned now working with, for instance, Cronenweth, or who was the name that I mentioned earlier? Where did it go? What was her name? I said it to you.
Tammy Riker.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was a gaffer for a long time. I worked for a lot of DPs, and
Right.
on Bones, I was young when I got that job. I think I was 24, which at the time, I mean, I guess it still probably is. I don't know. At the time, it was really rare to be that young and be gaffing a good sized network TV show. So I was excited. I mean, I was like super into it, and it was all the toys and all the resources of a big network TV show, but also all the anxiety and stress of it, that comes with that. I mean, and network television, certainly at the time, and I think to some degree now, was a game of you got to make it look as good as you can, but the director has to make the day.
Right.
And there's a lot of people looking over your shoulder, and there's a lot of politics for the DP to navigate, because it's like, yeah, they want it to look good, but you're not doing any overtime, and you're not, this is not auteur filmmaking.
Right.
And so, sometimes the sets were elaborate, sometimes they weren't. Gordon Lonsdale, who was shooting that show when I was there, was a real journeyman cameraman and a gentleman, and he was he could direct the camera very quickly, and he could break down coverage, screen direction, and very, very fast. And sometimes you get directors in network television that are really checked in and really prepared, and sometimes you don't. And you get this whole range. Every 8 days you get a new person who comes into the show. And I spent an enormous amount of my time on that show watching Gordon do this with these directors, and watch him break down screen direction, watch a rehearsal once. You might get a blocking rehearsal once, and then like, okay, great, and then put the camera here, and very quickly say, okay, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do a second camera here, we'll do a third camera, get this close up, and then we'll turn around, and that'll develop into this 2-shot, and then kind of quickly break the scene into the minimal amount of shots that are required to tell the story. And that's very television. But many years of doing that, I absorbed that a lot. And then when I started working with David, I took a lot of those skills, because we kind of work in the same way. We might make we're not shooting on 11:1 zooms and getting 3 sizes of everybody. We're shooting on primes, but the screen direction and the kind of cutting sequence is just a different use of the grammar that I had spent many years learning.
Right.
Thinking about screen direction, thinking about cutting pattern, thinking about pace, and how long you might stay in a wide shot, how you get a shot to develop, and when you're going to need a close up, and those kinds of conversations. So I wouldn't trade that experience for the world. I mean, the lighting technique on that show was very appropriate. It's not technique that I would use on Mindhunter or on Mank, certainly, or whatever, but it was very appropriate for what it was that we were doing, and I think that's really important, and people forget about that. It's like sometimes cinematographers, they're put in a position, you take a job and you're going to go shoot, you're going to shoot a children's movie or a Christmas movie or whatever, and it has to be glamorous, it has to be happy, it has to be soft. We always want to do these dark, exotic, aggressive looks, and sometimes it's actually a lot harder to beauty light 4 people in a room, and light it in such a way where you can work quickly and you're not moving 12 buys around every setup. I mean, I look at some of the work like Lowell Peterson did on Desperate Housewives. I mean, it's hard to do that. It's hard. It's a lot harder sometimes than doing something. Yeah.
I was gonna say I interviewed Fernando Arguelles, and he had just done Swamp Thing, and then kicked off and did Princess Switch 3. And he did Prison Break too. So he did these 2 like really dark, and then they went, "Hey, how would you like to shoot a Vanessa Hudgens Christmas film?" And he went, "Yeah."
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Sometimes it's like, you get pigeonholed, and it's like cinematographer should be able to do anything. You should be able to light Mariah Carey in one setup, and shoot Dahmer in the next week or whatever.
Yeah. And I guess going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, having that deeper film knowledge probably does help you make those decisions quicker instead of having to research like, oh, how do you light something like this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely as a gaffer and watching, and commercials for me. The great thing about commercials is you're like, once you get into the commercial world as a DP or as a gaffer, and you're doing a different job every week, it's like, okay, great, we're doing hair this week. Okay, next week we're doing puppy chow. Okay, next week we're doing, and you may say, oh, man, it's all a mayonnaise commercial to me. It's all stupid, but they all have their unique challenges that you're going to get presented with, and um, for me, it was like such a great place to kind of learn.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
you know, uh, and also like watching people that I did a bunch of L'Oreal commercials. And, there was like the guys that really the directors that specialized in hair. And like knowing when to overcrank, when to undercrank to get that look, and where to put the light so you get the glisten in the hair and all that stuff. Um, those are these are these are tools that you may not shoot hair commercials all the time, or you may not want to be the hair guy, but next time you got to shoot hair, you're going to be really thankful you spent that week and a half shooting Pantene, or whatever.
Yeah, sure. Uh, kicking. First of all, I've said a lot like, oh shit, I really want to get into commercials, and people are like, why? It's like more stressful because like I do mostly corporate stuff now, and it's relatively easy. Just make them look pretty, interviews sound good, great.
Sure.
But I think it's mostly because of that. Like the idea that you can learn so much from doing those wildly different jobs, potentially a lot, intrigues me. So if anyone's listening, hire me. But going into Devotion, the first thing I was struck, first of all, I spoke to Billy Fox a couple days ago. And I guess we'll start there. Like, what was your relation? He gave me his side, but what was your relationship with him like?
Well, Billy was great. I mean, we did a lot of previs on Devotion, and we did, and a lot of it was because we had an aerial unit shooting stuff in Washington State. We had first unit shooting stuff in Savannah, Georgia. We had first unit then shooting buck interiors in Atlanta, Georgia on stage. And all of those things were often shot like months apart. So all of us, Billy included, I think, felt that we needed a roadmap, or a plan for how we were going to put these scenes together. And a lot of it was just making sure, in the case of Devotion, the audience understood where everybody was in relation to each other. There's a sequence at the end of the movie where the sky is crashing, and the airplanes are different elevations, and they're all looking at each other, and it's like you can't, you don't want someone looking left at the airplane and then the other person looks left and they're supposed to be looking to the right. I mean, those are simple things to solve in a dining room. It's a whole different thing when you have to send an aerial unit out. You need a POV of the plane going left to right, and then you need the other side POV going right to left. Well, you've now established that those planes are here, and so like all of that stuff has to kind of be discussed in advance. Especially if you can shoot the aerials first. So Billy and JD and I talked a lot about how we were going to structure these scenes, and I find that cinematography, I often find that I feel the closest to the editor at the end of the movie. Like during the course of production, I feel the closest to the production designer, probably. I mean, hopefully the director, but after the director, usually the production designer, and sometimes the costume designer, but sometimes it's the first AD, but like while we're shooting a movie, but to be honest with you, when I think back about my experience of making a movie, it's it. I often think about the conversations I've had with the editor, either before, after, or during. It's the same thing when we did Mank and we were looking at cuts with Kirk Baxter. I mean, I love getting invited into the editing room, and I don't by no means expect to be invited, but it's lovely to go in and see how they're making it. And it's a lot like cooking. It's like in cinematography, you're making the sausage, and then you hang it up and you cure it for a little while, and then someone else takes it and they have to cook it, and you never really know if it's any good. You haven't tasted the sausage until it's cooked. And so if the editor understands how you've how you seasoned the meat, they'll have a much better idea about how they're going to cook it. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely.
So I don't know. I mean, I hope Billy had a good experience. I think he did. But,
no, he did. And he'd also, he kind of echoed what you said. Like it was an interesting collaborative relationship. I'm sure he's had it with others, but it's a written article. It actually just went up this morning if you want to check it out on Pro Video. But
cool.
But one thing that I asked him about was if he had been given like a CDL or a LUT or whatever, and he had mentioned that, like, even though obviously he's not the colorist, but he had mentioned that the film didn't really look any different after it left his hands and hit the theaters than it did how you were from what you got on set. And I was wondering, is that that doesn't seem very common. I feel like things get, manhandled to death in the DI a lot of times these days. So how did you manage that? How were you able to get that?
I think I think that you should progressively do less. At least in the image pipeline. It's like, so the big choices, in my opinion, should never be made in the grade. Right. They should be made in production design. So if you make an Ozark and you want it to be teal, put the actors in shoot it in overcast light, put the actors in cool tones, don't put red and yellow, and put a bunch, use pastels and limited color palette on the set, and then you won't have to do very much grading.
Right.
Don't shoot it in bright sunlight and then desaturate it. It all looks graded to me. I'm not specifically talking about Ozark. I'm just using Ozark as an example because of the color of the show. So for us on Devotion, it was the early color palette conversations were with Wynn Thomas, the production designer, and then Deirdre, the costume designer, and we talked about what and it wasn't like coming from me. It was a conversation that was coming from J.D. Dillard about how he wanted his movie to look. He wanted it to be khaki. He wanted it to be green. He wanted it to have color contrast, but not feel like, he didn't want the desaturated war movie look.
Right.
And so then, those choices were made primarily in what was in front of the camera, in terms of the big choices.
Right.
And then we made lighting choices, and we had one LUT, we had one show LUT, and it basically introduced a little bit of color in the shadows, coolness, and it took the highlights and the midtones a little yellow, kind of a split tone thing, and it desaturated red, and it didn't touch the gamma at all. And I don't really like to grade on the set. I don't like that process at all. I think that it confuses the colorist in the end, and I've never seen a colorist pull up a CDL a DIT did. It just doesn't happen. You don't go to company 3 and colorist isn't like, oh, let's see what the DIT did. It never happened.
Hey Jill, I have a better idea than you.
Yeah, exactly. I don't like to confuse it. Then, and then you're like, well, I got the dailies to look this way because I introduced all these secondaries that you don't have access to now. Now you're going to spend all of our color correction time trying to get it to look like dailies. It's like, well, let's just get the dailies to look like it because we're going to use one light, So, so I generally do something like that. And so we did a single LUT on the movie, and then, and then in the end, the grading was really just about chasing visual effects, and Ian, the colorist, was having daily conversations with visual effects artists and making sure that the set extensions were in the right palette to match with the foreground and all that stuff in terms of what we were doing with the LUT, because they're working they're working with an EXR and they don't always have the show LUT,
Right.
So if you're doing a lot of set extension, you've been really cautious about what the foreground tones are. Then you want after the rotoscope matte line, whatever they're putting in, you want the similar tones in those, so that when you then grade it, it looks right,
Right.
So there's that conversation is happening, and yeah, Billy's right. I mean, I think if you look at some of the stills, like the dailies pulls, they look like the movie,
Weirdly enough, they sent me a behind the scene. Well, they sent me a bunch of stuff, but there's this one 8-minute behind the scenes video that I saw. And yeah, the whoever the BTS videographer was and the photographers don't look much different than the film, a little bit, but it was surprising how well you'd locked in the look. And a lot of times with very little vision, at least in the shots I saw, not much lighting gear. Same thing that we were saying about, Mindhunter or whatever. It's not a ton of lighting.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of do, I kind of light reluctantly, I'm not excited. It's like lighting doesn't excite me, I mean, I think some people are like, oh, great, what do I do first? It's like, I'm always like, what do I turn off first? What can I get out of here?
To your point,
I want to do as little as possible.
Well, and I hope then you'll take this as a larger compliment. I didn't know I was going to interview you when I saw the film. I was going to interview Billy. And so I was trying to pay attention to sort of editing stuff, but obviously I'm a cinematographer and I'm watching it. And the film is so well composed. I kept on getting struck by how well, each frame was just very beautifully composed. And I'm wondering if that was a JD thing or was that a you thing, or obviously some hybrid of them. But I really wanted to make sure I gave you that compliment that it's a very...
Oh, thank you.
The compositions were lovely.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, JD wanted to make the movie in kind of a 90s style, kind of like big movie, epic American style, but told obviously with modern tools, and I think part of why he wanted to do that was it's a throwback to the movies of our childhood. I'm a little older than JD, but we reacted very much to the same movies that we were excited about, that were kind of big, epic American films, and also he wanted the cutting pattern and the structure of the movie to be succinct enough so as not to distract from the performances. Right. And we talked a lot about that a lot. It's like sometimes, for me anyway, sometimes a cut can take me totally out of a scene. And sure. So I think things like continuity and screen direction matter, and compositional, equality in terms of how much a person's size matches and focal length matches and all that stuff. That's a tedious way to make a movie, but the result is you get a really buttery cut. When you're having a conversation between two people, and a lot of the movie is a conversation between two people. So
yeah, way less action than I thought in this film. It's I think Billy said Billy said it's I think he said 70-30, 70% drama, 30% action. And I was like, it's a really wonderful surprise. If I guess if you don't really pay attention to, I went in pretty cold. So, I was like, oh, all right, cool.
Well, I think it's the script it read as a drama. Anyone who read the script and thought it was an action movie just didn't read the script. It's drama. There's action sequences, and it's sort of the catalyst for what these characters are going through. It's the background for. Yeah.
And I think the trailer kind of did you guys dirty a little bit. Trailer's very action heavy.
Well, It is. I mean, look, it's like it's tricky, you know. The movie's coming on the tail end of Top Gun, and obviously Top Gun is a spectacle film, and it's remarkable what they did. And I think it's like it's a real testament um, to all of those guys in terms of what they were trying to do. You know, just with our movie, we weren't trying to do any of that stuff, really.
Right.
You know, um, it's a totally different film. Yeah.
Well, and I want to get back to the composition thing because I did interrupt you, but I will say, having seen Top Gun recently and then seeing that movie, I guess it was just in my head that you shot the in-cockpit stuff live like they did, which I'm hoping is a compliment because the volume work you did looks, I couldn't tell. Like, obviously, that's maybe a bunch of people are like, you're an idiot if it was obvious, but like, my first thought was live, not volume. Okay, so then we'll talk about volume, but yeah, finish your thought about your interaction with JD and like the composition and how it wanted to be a kind of a 90s.
Well, no, it was just we wanted, so we asked the actors, the thing about my opinion, look, is if you have a good operator and an operator has compositional sensibility, they will find a great frame. The problem is if the operator spends half the shot finding the frame, you only get a great composition for 30% of it. And there's no way of guaranteeing that portion is going to end up in the cut, and you end up with this thing where the operator is sort of always fixing the frame. And that happens normally because you don't know where the actor is going to go. Right. So operators are framing for the actor. They're not framing for the background. And composition is about the combination in my opinion, about the foreground elements and how they interact and line up with the background elements. So in order to get a composition with intent, you have to not only predict but kind of pre-visualize where that person's going to be in relationship. You have the camera, you have the background, which either has perspective or it's flat or it's it's layers or whatever it is you're doing, and the person. And you have to put the camera in a place where they all complement each other, So in order for it to work, the actors have to be in the same place every time.
Yeah.
And it's technical way to work, and it requires participation from the actors, and it's not always possible, and it has to come from the director, and the actors have to be on board, and you have to say, hey, listen, we're going to rehearse the scene, we're going to figure out where you're going to be, you're going to stand there. Okay, if you're going to be there, then we're going to put the camera here. And it doesn't mean you have to tell them where to stand.
Right.
You just need to know, And if you're making a kind of very frenetic movie where they're like, look, man, I need freedom. I'm in an argument and I'm not sure where I'm going to land. And then you also put the camera on a dolly or a slider and you're always moving it. It has a very different aesthetic result. And you don't get the result that we had in Devotion, where someone's like, they're here, there's like this corner here and I'm there. And then it's like, you have this, thing that's obviously done intentionally. But it restricts performance, and it restricts, you have to shoot on prime lenses, and you have to sort of define where you can put the camera and stuff. It affects the process by which you make the movie in an enormous way. And you can debate, people, like Hitchcock and Truffaut had that conversation, for days.
I actually just bought that Hitchcock book by Truffaut, is it?
Truffaut, yeah.
Yeah, Truffaut.
It's
funny.
It's the most important book written on cinema in the history of cinema, I think.
Great purchase for me then, because I went to go see I went to see Penn Jillette did a book signing and read from his new book Random, and then I was walking through. There's this enormous Barnes and Noble at the Grove, so I went down to the film section, and I was like, oh, I'll get that. It's great pull for me.
It's amazing. Yeah.
It's actually funny about you mentioned framing back, because that's one of my Mank notes. I have more papers than that, I swear. But it's just framing backgrounds in quotes. You must have said it something along the lines, because that's always fascinated me. Is I think I'm bad at that. I think I'm bad at framing a background. I'm good at framing a face, but
sure.
Or historically, I've gotten better because I've been thinking about it. But does that strike any bells? Like something that's a terrible question.
Well,
but
I mean, I think we, look, a shot is a shot is kind of what I said. It's the relationship between the foreground. We're taking 3 dimensions and we're distilling it into 2 dimensions.
Yeah.
So you take a lens and you're deciding how much compression you're going to apply and how much of the background you need to see. And obviously on a wide lens closer, you see more of the background. So for I think look, it's easy to put a long lens on the camera and follow the actors around the room, and you can shoot a wide shot, the kind of classic network American television. You shoot a wide shot, you say, oh look, they're in the bedroom,
Right. Yeah.
and then you put the camera on a dolly, and then you give the operator a 12:1, and you say, look man, I just need 2 sizes, just shoot the interaction.
Yeah.
And and if you do that and you cover the performance, that's fine. It's totally acceptable. But I think you put an enormous amount of weight on the power of the script and the actors, because you're just recording the interaction, and their relationship in the room and their relationship to each other and how they interact with, if you're excluding the foreground person, you're not getting an over the shoulder, you're not getting context to what's happening in the room. You don't have an understanding of how far away they are from the wall or whatever, how close they are to each other. I think you're losing an enormous amount of the drama.
Right.
And if you include context of where they are in the room, and instead of reframing when they focus, just reframing when they lean forward, putting the camera where they lean in, it's like, if someone's in profile and they lean forward and you frame forward, it's a completely different effect on the audience than if you're in a close-up and they lean in,
Right.
Well, in order to get a close-up where they lean in, you have to put the camera in a place where that's going to work, and sometimes it doesn't work for the whole scene. It's like that shot in the opening of Rear Window, when Grace Kelly leans in. You can't get on an 11:1 zoom on a dolly off the camera. You get an over the shoulder, and he leans in and sort of was like, you still cover the scene, but the scene wouldn't be the same.
Right.
And so, when we talk about framing backgrounds, we're really talking about directing the camera and thinking about, okay, well, what's important in this scene beyond what's being said? It goes for blocking. It's like, okay, if the person's going to be there, and they're in front of the bookcase, maybe they're in front of the bookcase because there's subtext in the scene that's relative. And I'm not talking about like, oh, it's buried deep in the text. It's like, it has to do with the way the scene is developing,
Right. Because I remember in Devotion, there's that scene where, the main character, he's talking, he's talking to his wife, and he's just backed into that corner, in the kitchen, and that was. I just remember going, oh yeah, that's good. That was my little DP blocking brain went, yeah, okay, got it.
Well, but in the case of that, it's like, when we did that scene, JD brought the actors in and they ran it. It wasn't like, I certainly didn't say, oh, Jonathan should be in the corner,
Right.
They ran it 3 or 4 times, and, once with them seated on the table. And Jonathan, I think it was probably Jonathan, who was like, what if we try it in the corner? Like, can I start here? And everyone was like, yeah, man, you could totally, try it. Sure. And then you run it a few ways. And then I say, okay, cool. We're going to do that. Then I'm just going to light it with this practical, and we're going to leave you dark in the corner, because you're in the corner, it helps, in my opinion, it felt like it helped the scene, and everyone went with that idea,
It was obviously there's a lot of scenes that stand out, but that one in particular was, especially because it's a very, important moment, important conversation, but yeah, it was very well done there from everyone involved. I know I got to let you go here. I did briefly want to, just because it's the new thing and it's interesting, I wanted to ask about your experience using the volume, because had you done that before?
I had, I'd done a lot of all the driving work. Well, it wasn't technically volume, but going back to Mindhunter, we've done all the driving work with LED, and so I'd done a lot of it, and then I'd done commercials as a gaffer with Claudia Miranda back in the day with rear projection, and when we did Bones, we did all the driving with rear projection. So it wasn't like, and I think it's a funny. Yeah, I find the whole volume conversation really hilarious because,
It's just for your projection.
go back to you go back to Catch a Thief. I mean, Hitchcock did it in, what was it, 1957 or whenever that movie was made. I mean, it's like he went and he went to Monaco. They shot all the plates for the shots he wanted to shoot in the car. And then they went on stage and they set up a carbon arc projector, and they put Grace Kelly in the car, and they shot the same shot, and it's like, look, it has technical limitations, but it was 60 years ago, right. and it's ostensibly the same idea. And then look at Lassie, same idea, painted backdrop, right? We didn't go to green screen because, we went to green screen in the case of Star Wars because you couldn't shoot in space.
Right. Yeah.
But we didn't put green screens outside windows because the quality of backings wasn't really there. We started to put green screens outside windows because people didn't want to commit.
Right.
Right. It's like, oh, well, just put the green screen outside the car because we don't want to shoot the plates in advance. Like, it's a lot of work to do it the Hitchcock way and go out there and say, well, we're going to put the camera here. So put a 65 millimeter VistaVision camera here on the car, and then we shoot this profile plate, and then shoot another one. So we, for this period of 30 years in the film business, we went to blue and green screen comps. And now everyone is talking about the LED volume like it's this new idea. And it's like, no, guys, it's like the same thing that Hitchcock was doing in the 50s. It's just the display is a different idea.
Yeah.
And then you hear all these people saying, oh my God, but then I have to shoot the plates early. And it's like, yeah, guys. And that's why we all went to blue screen. It's obviously a better way to do it. Right. If you do the homework, but it's not at all in terms of execution a new idea at all, really. There's a lot of people behind computer screens that are delivering you the content, but they're basically projectionists.
Yeah.
It's different in the case of Unreal Engine, where you have to model the environments in 3D, obviously, and all that stuff. But I had a good experience on the volume. We wanted to. There's the opening sequence, the opening airplane sequence in the movie where they're flying in the Bearcats. It was shot for real.
Oh, cool!
And it was shot for real because we had a trainer aircraft that was a good match to the Bearcat in terms of the cockpit and the control surfaces and the wings and stuff to the Bearcat, but it was a two-seater, so we could put a pilot in the front. And there was room for the camera, and we put the actors in the back. So we had that airplane, and we could put the actors in it. But it's hard, the actors go up, they have to direct themselves, you have to tell them what direction to look, and you don't know what takes they've done. There's no way to see the image on the ground. Excuse me, they take off and they fly 100 kilometers to the location, and they have to say, okay, action, and now I'm going to do it, and then you're going to fly this route, and then and you kind of hope that their relationship to the background is correct for the story, because they're thinking about acting, and they're thinking about their eye line, they're thinking about the screen direction, they're thinking about all these things you've told them on the ground, but then they're also doing loops, and they're feeling it in their stomach, and it has you're asking a lot,
right?
And so, but we did it for real, and then we got the footage. The planes came back. We're like, oh, okay, good. It's in focus. It's exposed. It's okay. And you watch it, and you're like, okay, this works. Did you guys roll the camera? Did you hit the red button we told you to hit? You know what I mean? Yeah. But we had 11 pages in the cockpit, and it wasn't, even if we had the airplanes, it wasn't possible for us.
Right.
And in the case of the court. Yeah, they're really, and it all had to happen at dusk. And if you've ever flown a vintage, or you've been involved in anyone who flies vintage propeller-driven aircraft, it's like the weather, the ceiling, the visibility conditions, and the reliability of the airplane all take precedence for obvious reasons over the light, and the sun position. And we had scenes that had to be shot at dusk, and they required, we needed to see the setting sun, and we need to feel all that. And all of that's beside the point. The fact we didn't have a two-seater Corsair, so we couldn't we couldn't do it for real. You know,
Right.
we would have had to build the airplane. So yeah, we shot plates and we did it on a volume, and you know, it proved to be, I think, really successful, and it was great for a lot of reasons. You know, and one of the things that was wonderful about it is you're able to get all of the subtleties in the glass canopy that you don't get if it's digital. You know, and it's you know, and when I've shot in glass canopies or cars before, you know, what I've found most of the time is they rotoscope that glass out, they kind of track the reflections, and they put CG glass back in it, and they replicate the reflections. It never quite looks real, you know.
Right.
And so it, you know, that was enormous. But the other thing that's sort of completely not image related, but has a huge effect on the movie, is it meant that Billy, the editor, and JD in the editing room had basically completed shots to cut from.
Right.
So, you know, it's hard, I think, when you're cutting a movie and you're trying to craft emotion, and you're going from one person in a plane with a green screen behind them to another person in a plane with a green screen behind them. You have to imagine that they're in a dive and now they're in a bank and all this stuff, and you don't have context. And you know, and so they're able to cut those movies into the assembly and then show them to Sony or show them to test audiences without doing a bunch of visual effects work, and the audience would say, "Oh, yeah, that's you know, that they immediately understand what's happening on it in the scene." You know, and it's funny. I mean, I think Devotion now is, you know, people assume there's a lot more visual effects in the movie than there are. I mean, the reality is it's like pretty much, you know, we had 4 Corsairs the whole time. So if there's 4 Corsairs in the movie, there are 4 real Corsairs. If there's 5 Corsairs in the movie, there's 4 real ones and one that's been duplicated. You know, it's not like you're looking at 6 completely CG planes ever. You know,
I think
it's just.
I think Billy mentioned that like he would get some of that volume footage back, and he'd be like, "Oh wow, this is one of the shots they got for real." And then like a practical light or a film light would like come through behind the cockpit, and he'd be like, "What the fuck?" Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, we worked hard on it, you know. But I mean, one of the things we did is we made a rule that we would never put the camera in a place you couldn't actually put the camera if the plane was real.
Of course.
You know, I mean, that's one of the, you know, it's like, I think you know, if you watch Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and you see them in the flying car and they're, you know, it's obviously a flying car in front of a backing because the camera is like moving around like it's on a dolly around this air, you know, around this flying car.
Yeah.
You know, the audience knows you can't do that. So we decided we'd never put the camera in a place they wouldn't, you know, where it would give away the card trick.
Yeah, of course. I've kept you longer than I should have, but so I'll let you go. But this has been a wonderful conversation. I hope I can have you back. But I end the podcast with the same 2 questions for everyone, and they are as follows. 1, if you're going to put you're programming a double feature with Devotion and another film, what is the other film?
Oh God. Devotion and another film.
It can complement, it can contrast. It's totally up to you.
I think maybe well,
I've said this a million times. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say Midnight Cowboy.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think that's too much. I don't know. I mean, I think Mississippi Burning, maybe.
Okay.
You
know, I will say, and I've used this example a million times, but it's just a funny one. When I asked Cronenweth, when I interviewed him for Being the Ricardos, he immediately said Alien versus Predator. So, Midnight Cowboy works.
I am. Jeff has always been more clever than I am.
Yeah, he's a fun guy to talk to.
Yeah.
Second question. Everyone always asks everyone, what's the best piece of advice you got? What's the worst piece of advice you got?
about the script.
Mm.
Um, I I think that I think. Do you want me to elaborate why, or
Yeah. Please.
just
Yes,
leave it there?
please.
I think that judging a script is the hardest thing to do, and it's clear if you watch the movies that get greenlit and the movies that succeed every year. You know, I mean, it's like judging a movie by the script and judging which movies to make by the script is hard for anyone, and it's hard for people who just read scripts all day long and decide which movies to greenlight. I think, and I think the script is a serving suggestion, and the movie gets made with a combination of people that are involved. You know, the actors, the kind of visual, creative people. Not that actors aren't creative, but the production designer, costume designer, DP, hair and makeup, and obviously the director. And so, if you read the script and you don't immediately react to it, I think that that's a mistake. I think the thing to do is to read the script, and if there's something you see in there that's interesting, but it doesn't speak to you immediately, then maybe the director has a point of view that's going to change your mind, And I think a lot of people make the mistake of, they think the first thing they should do is read the script. And I would actually prefer, in some cases, if I have somebody is interested in working with me, for example, I'd rather talk to the director first and then read the script so I have context. Because if the director has an idea about how they want to make the movie, that to me is far more interesting to then apply to how I read the script. I'd rather not read the script cold,
That makes total sense.
So I think that's the worst advice. And I think unfortunately, it's advice that a huge portion of Hollywood takes, is the first thing they all do is read the script. I want to know who's involved. I want to know who's making the creative decisions.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense, because sometimes, for sure, I've seen it happen, but oftentimes the writer is not on set and is not making decisions, so it's not necessarily applicable to your work.
Yeah,
in the day.
Exactly. I mean, it has, and I also think that it's very difficult to, it's very difficult to understand subtext without watching a script performed, because the way screenplays are written, and to me, what makes movies interesting, what makes an individual scene interesting, and then the film interesting, is the subtext. I mean, look, I just saw Bardo. I think Bardo is spectacular, and Bardo is a complicated movie. But I guarantee you, reading that script, you'd be like, "What the fuck is this?"
Right.
But then you see what he did, and you see how the movie comes together, and and then you say, "Okay, well, there's all of this other stuff happening in the film that was never on the page." So by no means is it am I suggesting that screenwriting isn't an incredibly important thing. I just find it very difficult to judge the value of the movie from the screenplay,
Yeah. I mean, no one, this is a corny ass example, but no one reads Shakespeare. You want to see it performed.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And I'm sure Tenet was a tough script to read.
Yeah, of course. Sure. I mean, it's also, I think for me anyway, I don't have a lot of trust in myself in terms of being able to assess a scene in script form. I just don't. I think that's an incredibly unique skill, and it's when I watch actors perform scenes that I've read, sometimes I read scenes, I'm like, man, this doesn't make any sense, and then I see it on its feet with great performers. And it happened on Mindhunter a lot. I see the actors perform, I was like, man, I had no idea what was happening in this scene until I saw it get read.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think the director doesn't. Sometimes I think you see the scene take shape, and you see interactions between people, between the actors. They're looking at each other at certain lines. You're like, why are you reacting that way? Oh, well, I should be afraid at this moment, right? Oh, yeah, you should be afraid at that moment. Okay, we should make sure we get a close-up of that moment so we can, you know what I mean? It's like,
yeah,
that might not be in the script at all, but it might be the central pivot of the scene, and it might entirely have been the writer's intent. because they applied subtext in that the actor felt, but that I completely missed. Happens to me all the time.
Yeah. Did you? Stupid side question. Did you ever watch Fringe?
I did. I watched Fringe after Fringe was on because Anna Torv had been in Fringe, and so I was getting ready to do Mindhunter, and I wanted to see Anna.
Yeah, I love that show. I got all the Blu-ray. Well, not all of them; they're expensive as shit. But I love that show so much. That was like modern day X-Files, but like I could go on about Fringe, but
yeah,
it's a really good show. Well, I'll let you go, man. Thank you so much for spending the time with me. I had a lot of fun, and I hope you did too.
You bet, man.
But
yeah, absolutely.
When you're done, when you're on the press tour for this one you're working on, hopefully we can have you back and talk a little more.
You got it. Sounds good.
Awesome. Take care, man.
All right, dude. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production. It's produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by Pro Video Coalition. Our theme song is written and performed by Mark Pelly, and the F at our Matbox logo was designed by Nate Truax of Truax Branding Company. You can read or watch the podcast you've just heard by going to provideocoalition.com or youtube.com/owlbot, respectively. And as always, thanks for listening.